The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.
AFC Bournemouth, of course, announced a new partnership with a gambling sponsor last week. Of course, that gambling sponsor was BJ88. Are we dancing with the devil? Do we have to dance with the devil? That is the big question. Also, how close to the wind are AFC Bournemouth sailing to PSR? And also, we'll talk about the club's finances as well as a number of other clubs. How do Ipswich Town compete in the Premier League this season? And the other clubs at real serious threat. Plus, also, how clubs have been getting around it. Now, of course, I've got a very special guest on the show. He's been on before. He is the football finance expert, and also he does run the Price of Football podcast. It is a pleasure to welcome back onto Up the Cherries in all departments, KIERAN Maguire. Welcome back to the show, KIERAN. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's quite nice to have a break from football. I was at Berlin a couple of weeks ago watching England in the final against Spain. And now just trying to get some time off, really. But the world of football finance, unfortunately, never stops. It is genuinely 365 days a year in terms of the amount of content that there is these days, which is both good and bad. Yeah, keeps me occupied, but it doesn't particularly impress my wife.
No, fair enough. Firstly, what did you make of England during the summer?
They were okay. I think the slaughter that they got initially was too harsh, and I think the praise that they got was too much as well. I think they were sort of halfway in between. If you take a look at the first 6 games, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Netherlands, and I've forgotten the others. The total population of all of the countries up to the semi-final was less than the population of England. So they should have been winning those matches, and they sort of they did enough to get through without ever exciting us. I thought there was some brilliant moments. Bellingham's goal, Ollie Watkins' goal, some absolutely brilliant moments during the competition from England, but I can't think of what I call a brilliant performance or even a very good performance. So, it was okay.
We got the easy side of the draw as well, didn't we, KIERAN? To be honest, it happened again.
We did, but then it's a case of saying that England earned that by coming top of the group. Yeah, that's what you do benefit from that. But yes, if you could have asked for that tranche of teams through to the semi-final, then I think you'd have snapped their hands off. So I think certainly walking away from the stadium, and I'm not mature enough to have stayed to cheer on the Spanish team picking up the trophy. I'm far too sulky for that, as with the vast majority of England fans, and I don't blame them at all. The general sense was everybody was just subdued because nobody could say we deserved to win, and it was difficult to take any positives. At the same time, there wasn't anger; it was just same old, same old.
Yeah, most definitely, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think we were Spain were much the better side, and we were vastly inferior to them on the day. They were the best team throughout the whole tournament. But of course, it's good to get back to club football. And of course, there's been a lot of talk with regards to AFC Bournemouth. Just casting our minds back to April, we got a little bit of a surprise actually in April. And we found out for the 22-23 season, we made a 44 million pre-tax profit. Firstly, KIERAN, how did we get there? Because I understand that Maxim Denim wrote off quite a lot of shareholder loans, didn't he?
That's right. I think you also have to be a little bit cautious when talking about profit, because there's actually sort of 6 or 7 different definitions of profit as far as accounts are concerned. The figure that I use showed that Bournemouth lost around about 21 million.
Yeah.
And we call that sort of the underlying, the sort of the core profit. So you're absolutely right. There was a 71 million pound bonus. Effectively, Maxim Denim who'd been a benevolent owner when he sold the club on, effectively wrote off a significant amount that was due to him as part of the deal. And on the back of that, the club has claimed that as income, which is, it's acceptable from an accounting point of view. I think if you're looking at from an investment point of view, are you going to get that 71 million pounds every year? No. So I think if you focus on the core, the underlying profit, Bournemouth did okay in what was ultimately a first season back in the Premier League. But the fact that they're still losing 400 grand a week is a cause for concern, because either you're going to have to have owners that underwrite those losses, or alternatively you've got to cut costs, and that of course increases the chances of relegation, or you've got to boost revenues, which I guess is one of the topics we'll be coming on to in due course.
Yes. Well, of course, one thing that was really, really upset Bournemouth fans is, of course, we were sponsored by Dafabet the last 2 seasons. Of course, we haven't got the accounts. Those will be released next year with regards to this season just gone. But we've left Dafabet and we've gone to a sponsor called BJ88, which is an interesting sponsor. Of course, it means that 11 sides in the Premier League are sponsored by gambling companies. Now, I'll be honest, Kieran, I don't like gambling companies at all. You know, gambling does ruin people's lives. You know, I've never been addicted to gambling. You know, I'll have a £1 on accumulator, but there is people that will be affected by that. But do we have to, as a club, dance with the devil because of the amounts that are being put up by this company? And of course, it's going to be outlawed in 2 years' time anyway.
That comes down to the owners. And I was reading an article in The Athletic earlier today with Billy Hogan, who's the head honcho, the chief executive at Liverpool, talking about sponsors, talking about things. And he says, ultimately, you're judged by the company that you keep.
Yeah.
And I can understand Bournemouth fans, or some Bournemouth fans, you know, you've got to accept it's a broad church, of course, being disappointed in the club, not just because it's a gambling company, but because it's this gambling company. I went on to the BJ88 website shortly before we started this call just to check up on things. And it's similar to what we've seen with quite a few new sponsors of the Premier League clubs. They've got a website which is effectively just a holding page saying, oh, we're going to introduce a sports book in due course. So clearly what they're effectively saying here is we're not actually interested in English punters. Now, part of me says, well, that's actually quite good, you know, and this is not xenophobic in any way, shape, or form. You know, one of my neighbours has got a gambling addiction. My mum's partner's got a gambling addiction. You know, I've seen it, and I've seen the consequences of it. And the first thing you want to do is to protect those who are close to you. So it is very much aimed at the Asian market. But I don't know whether you've been monitoring the work undertaken by I think it's a Norwegian investigative website called Josimar, and they have done extensive research into these gambling companies, and some of their revelations are quite shocking. The gambling license has not been generated here in the UK for BJ88. It's been generated by a company called TGP, which is located in the tax haven and the sort of the low scrutiny Isle of Man, which appears to be a convenience. I don't think BJ88 are trying to take money off Bournemouth fans here in the UK. They are very much aimed at Cambodia, Vietnam, and although gambling is illegal in China, there are various ways of doing it. So it isn't pleasant. I think the Premier League has been very disingenuous when it announced that gambling sponsorship was going to end at the end of the 25-26 season. That actually means, therefore, the 26-27 season. So it's just sort of the use of words, and its front of shirt deals are going to be prohibited, but that's going to, of course, be replaced with sleeve sponsorship deals. So I gamble myself probably along the same lines as you, and I do what I refer to as an emotional hedge. So I bet on Brighton to lose. Yeah, that's and towards the end of last season, I was betting on Brighton to lose and not score. So when we went to Bournemouth and you deservedly trounced us 3-0, I walked away with quite a lot of money, but I wasn't happy. But at least I was slightly more wealthy than I was before the match started. So I'm not anti-gambling. Yeah, it's a leisure activity, but it's a leisure activity which has addictive consequences. It's a leisure activity which does have repercussions in terms of depression, domestic violence, fraud, theft, when people go in too far. And it's an industry which pays lip service to its responsibilities towards what it refers to as problem gamblers. A problem gambler, as far as the gambling industry is concerned, is a punter who wins and wins regularly. And if you are a problem gambler, what they would do, they simply close down your account. As for the people who are being rinsed on a daily or weekly basis, doesn't really care about those. Doesn't want them dead, because dead punters place no acres. Yeah, and it's a horrible thing to say, and I don't want to sound unduly cynical, but that's the attitude of the people in control of this industry.
Talking about Brighton, I'm slightly envious of you guys because, of course, you are sponsored by American Express, and you've got a long-standing relationship with them. You've also recorded the most pre-tax profit out of any team in the Premier League. Firstly, with regards to that American Express deal, how much of input do they put into Brighton? Is it a good deal? I'm guessing it probably is, because of course they sponsor the stadium as well. But also, how has that pre-tax profit been achieved by Brighton?
Right, if we look at those in turn, American Express has had a long-term relationship with the city of Brighton, to the extent that my dad, ironically, used to work for American Express in London, and we moved to Brighton in 1973 because Amex were moving their European headquarters to Brighton. And it's always been a major employer as far as the city is concerned. Ironically, I think it's now shifted most of those jobs elsewhere. So I think as far as the club is concerned, when the new stadium was being built, they were looking for somebody with naming rights. And I think it's essential that if you do have a new stadium, that those naming rights are sorted straight away. And it's done on a long-term basis. And they managed to sort of secure that relationship with Amex. The deal was renewed, I think it was around about 2019. And I think it's an 11-year deal worth £100 million. So it's good money. It's not outstanding money. Yeah, Manchester United get £90 million a year from Adidas, for example. But for a club of our size, it's useful. It's allowed the club, and I know people will say, well, surely there's a hypocrisy here, given that the club is owned by a professional gambler or somebody who has made money through the gambling industry. But, I guess I would say this to a certain extent. Tony Bloom isn't interested in you or me as gamblers, because he runs a gambling syndicate. And if you want to go into that syndicate, you've got to be a multimillionaire. So I think he's targeting a different market, and they offer gambling advice, and there's a big consortium that's run and so on. So I think he didn't want a gambling sponsor. Amex liked the idea of having a relationship with a new part of the city in terms of the stadium, and that relationship has worked well. Could Brighton have perhaps made a bit more money from a different sponsor? Perhaps, but they will argue that it's allowed them to go to other sponsors for, we've all got now the official travel partner and the official mobile phone partner and all of this type of thing, and say, look, we're gambling free. So therefore, do you want to go and partner with us, as opposed to partnering with clubs in a similar area? And I can include Bournemouth there, Palace, Wolves, Burnley, when they've been in the Premier League. So as part of the pitch for other sponsors, it says, look, you can come to Brighton and you won't have to go and deal with the arguments about gambling sponsor, because we're not going to have one. So it's allowed them to perhaps pick up a couple of extra. So whilst I think they've not necessarily maxed out in terms of the money from Amex, it has allowed them to build up a portfolio of commercial partners who might have reservations with regards to being associated with gambling indirectly. So that's somewhere. In terms of the profit, again, what I would say to you is the underlying position as far as Brighton is concerned is that they're losing £20 million a year. It's the transfer market that has done very well for Brighton. We're very lucky to have the club connected to somebody who has been fantastically generous to the club, has put in hundreds of millions of pounds, and that is, of course, Todd Bowley at Chelsea.
Yeah, most definitely. One thing that does concern me about our finances moving forwards is, and why I wanted to bring up Brighton as well, is I thought you was going to mention about the transfers that have come out of Brighton and the money that's come in from those. We don't seem to be having the same sort of model. So although we're signing a lot of players, we're not really seeing much go out. And of course, Lloyd Kelly has gone out on a free to Newcastle. His contract has run down. Kiefer Moore, the fee was very, very nominal compared to what you would expect elsewhere. How much of a concern is that moving forwards, considering PSR and also new regulations that will come in?
Well, if we take a look at Bournemouth's player sale profit, let's just sort of go back to sort of 101 as far as football finance is concerned. Football clubs get money from ticket sales, and I think as far as Bournemouth are concerned, unless there's a major redevelopment, you're going to be stuck at around about £5.5 million forevermore. And that compares to, at Brighton, it's around about 20. So you got a £15 million deficit to start off with. Manchester United make £136 million from ticket sales. So you're starting off on minus £130 million at the start of the season. The broadcast money is sorted centrally, and then you've got sponsorship and commercial income as well. That was noticeably lower in 2023 than Bournemouth's previous seasons in the Premier League. Now, it could be that, again, you're starting to build up a portfolio of partners. So on the back of that, it's important that the club uses, if possible, player sales as your fourth arm of income coming in. And if we go back to sort of 2017, they actually lost money on player sales. 2018, a £1 million profit, then 2020, £23 million profit. When the club went down, sold a few players, made 56. Then that dropped to 7, less than £2 million in 2023. So player trading has not been particularly lucrative for Bournemouth. And that means that it does mean that they are at a disadvantage against other clubs who you must consider to be in your peer group. And therefore, I'm talking Fulham, Brighton, Palace, Wolves, clubs like ours. You look at the clubs that are coming up, Ipswich and so on. And Southampton, Leicester. I guess it would include Leicester. So yeah, i.e. non-Big Six clubs.
Yeah.
I think Bournemouth have not been as successful as some of those other clubs, which means that you are more reliant on the players on your signing delivering, and also perhaps having to operate on a slightly lower budget in respect of other issues. So if you take a look at Bournemouth's wage bill, it's £100 million. The average wage, based on my very, very crude calculations, is £48,000 a week. The average wage in the Premier League is around about 70. So you're operating in a different market. It's still a lucrative market compared to many of the other clubs in Europe. So it does mean that Bournemouth can still be competitive with La Liga, Serie A, the Bundesliga, and so on, with the exception of those clubs that are in the Champions League. So you're not at a huge disadvantage. But if Bournemouth and Wolves and Palace and Brighton are all after the same player, then the player has no loyalty towards Bournemouth. They don't know where Bournemouth is. They don't know where Brighton is. They don't know where Wolverhampton is. They certainly don't know where Croydon is. And on the back of that, they're going to take the best deal for themselves. So I think that would be my slight concern for the club, if you're competing against other clubs for players. At the same time, there's a very big market out there for players, and there's no reason why you still can't get some very good players with the level of wages that you're paying. I think that was reflected in your position last season.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, we had a fantastic season. The players that did come in were very, very well recruited by Richard Hughes, of course, now at Liverpool, Simon Francis, and now we've got Thiago Pinto as well, who's also involved in this. One thing I did want to ask you, though, is with regards to the academy. And of course, Brighton have got a successful academy. There's a lot of teams with successful academies. We haven't really got that at the moment. So we haven't got an academy, which is, of course, grade 1. We have, though, got a new training ground that is being built at Canford Magna. Now, how important is it to get a Category 1 academy, which is developing players, and how much is that going to cost the club?
Well, I think first of all, I do think it's essential. If Bournemouth want to be a long-term participant in the Premier League, then every academy player that comes through saves you £20 million in transfer fees and potentially could be sold on. And also those players who don't quite make the grades can still go out on loan to championship clubs, to other European clubs. And what you will find is you start to get a drip of players that you are selling for 2, 3, 4, £5 million, which all contributes towards. You sell a player for £5 million from the academy. That's the equivalent of every ticket sold at the Vitality, in a season. So I do think it's good for that purpose. So we'd say that's an opportunity cost issue. What is the cost of running an academy? As far as Cat 1 is concerned, I think realistically, you're not going to get much change from £7 to £8 million a year. Mm-hmm. Whereas a Cat 2, you could probably get by with 1.5 to 2. I know an academy manager of a Cat 1 club who is in the Championship, and he was given a £6 million. Well, he was nominally given a £6 million a year budget, and this was in the Championship. Although in practice, he was very honest. He says, I've actually got £1.5 to £2 million a year. And what the club does is, because academy costs are excluded from PSR, they put other costs through on the sly. So he's having to operate, he was still having to go and buy the cones and the bibs himself. And this is for a supposed Category 1 academy. That's a separate story. I think the benefits to Bournemouth is it does give a pathway to some of the young local talent. The big danger is that if you are Category 2, then all that you need is a scout from Chelsea, and Chelsea are. I loathe Chelsea, but they are very, very good at academy development because they are Category 1, and they effectively set up satellites all around the country. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, you've got somebody who can come to the the child and also the child's parents and say, A, we're Chelsea, no disrespect to Bournemouth or Brighton, but Chelsea are bigger than both of those clubs. So you can get a little bit starry-eyed on the back of that. And also we are Category 1, so therefore they will sell the benefits in terms of education, interpersonal development and so on, which are nonsense because one of the big issues I have with Category 1 academies is that if you take a look at the educational background of somebody who joins an academy, it tends to be above the national average. And by the time they leave that Category 1 academy, it's below the national average. So in my view, Category 1 academies are failing children. And they are, and remember, we are talking about children. I'm not trying to be over emotive here, because these kids are in such a competitive environment that they make sacrifices. They make sacrifices in terms of their socializing. They don't go out with their mates. Everything is, they know that their diet's being monitored, their lifestyle is being monitored, and so on. So there are impact in terms of their personal development. And the other thing that they sacrifice is their education, because part of them is thinking, well, I don't need to go and work hard at school. I'm becoming a professional footballer. But there's a 99.8% failure rate as far as these academies are concerned. So that's a separate issue. If Bournemouth want to be able to retain a greater number of kids from the local area, then having a Category 1 academy can make a difference. And if it's only 2 or 3 players a season, but those 2 or 3 players, the ones which the bigger clubs are looking to poach. And again, you've got to look at, it's a horrible thing. The more you read about academies and the more you talk to people about academies, the more depressing it becomes. You'll talk to an academy coach and he says, we got 25 quids in this particular year group, in this particular set. I already know 2 years in advance which 23 of them are going and which 23 are going, but we need to have them around for the good kids to play against. So they're there purely as cannon fodder. And they've got no chance of progressing. And the kids don't know this, and the parents don't know this, because it's their little, it's their little David, their little Justin, their little Tommy, or whatever it's going to be. And again, that's a really depressing factor. But it would allow Bournemouth to be able to develop closer relationships with the parents, ideally put a more enhanced educational opportunities for the child themselves, because if things don't work out, then they need a backup plan. And if you're a Category 1, you've got to invest more in education, even though it's not enough.
I know we mentioned PSR a little moment ago, but one thing is being talked about is, of course, Leicester, potential points deduction there. Everton, of course, are still under a lot of attention themselves. Of course, this takeover just rolls on and on and on and on and on. Is there any other teams apart from those two that are sailing a little bit too close to the wind?
There certainly were some clubs who were very close, and we did have this year. The media finally cottoned on, and I'm not trying to be smug here, because this is my job, but I've been saying for quite some time, the 30th of June is a mini transfer deadline, and this year it really crystallised. I was asked to do a report by Sky to look specifically at 6 clubs, and those 6 clubs were Newcastle, Aston Villa, Everton, Forest, Leicester, and I've forgotten the final one, and Chelsea.
Yeah.
And I did that, and it went up on the Sky website, and Chelsea kicked up such a fuss that they made it take it down. It turns out that Chelsea have sold some more car parks, or sold the women's team to themselves to get around it. So yes, there were a number of clubs who were very, very close to breaching the rules. But because we saw some unusual transfer activity, they weren't quite player swaps. It was a player would go from, let's say, Leicester to Chelsea, and then 24 hours later, a player would go from Chelsea to Leicester. And Villa were involved, and Everton were involved, and so on. And these last-minute player sale profits, I think, have allowed those clubs to satisfy the PSR limits. Mm-hmm. The case of Leicester is, however, far more complex, and the reason for that is that there is a fair chance that Leicester may have breached the limits for the 3 years ended the 30th of June 2023, i.e. the year that Leicester were relegated. Yeah. They paid £114 in wages for every £100 that came through the door. I think they budgeted to finish 8th, and they ended up in the relegation zone. So they were hit quite badly. They managed to prove that under the constitution of both the Premier League and the EFL, that they were not an EFL club last season, from a PSR point of view. So therefore, the EFL could not charge them. They're now trying to prove that because they were in the EFL last season, that the Premier League rulebook, which says you need to be charged by January or February in 2024, and that didn't apply either. So they're trying to sort of be in this no man's land. And I think that particular claim has failed as far as Leicester are concerned, although I understand that they are appealing. If they lose that appeal, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think there's a fair chance that they could be on the receiving end of a charge there.
One thing as well, and probably the final question really, is with regards to teams coming up, and I want to pick one out in particular, which is Ipswich Town. Of course, for the accounts ending 2022, we made the money that we made from income from the EFL was 37 million, I think 38 million. But with Ipswich, because they've had this back-to-back successive promotions, how difficult is it going to be for them to keep within these restraints, considering where they've come from, and when comparing all these accounts to each other?
I think in terms of what they can spend in 24-25, they still have some leeway. We've only seen their accounts for the season in which they were promoted from League One, and they made a huge loss that season, and they had a massive wage bill, and they had their squad, I think it was more than 50% of the total squad value of clubs in League One. So they invested to get promoted, and they deservedly so. I won't be mealy mouthed about it at all. They did spectacularly well last season in what was a very competitive championship, given that you could argue that Leicester, Southampton and Leeds are all sort of Premier League clubs in waiting. So I think they did spectacularly well. And again, you've got to give them credit for it. They've got an additional £100 million to play with in terms of the TV money. So that does give them some scope to invest. I think we will see very significant investment by Ipswich Town standards, but not huge by Premier League standards. So, an advantage of being in League One 2 seasons ago was that the expectations of players will perhaps be a little bit reduced. And what you tend to see is that when clubs are in their first season in the Premier League, and they've not been there for quite a few years, the wage bill reflects that. So from the player's point of view, if they were earning £7,000 a week in League One as one of the highest payers in that division, if they're on 40 grand or 45 grand in the Premier League, that looks absolutely fantastic. What you will find is that the following season, those players will be going and say, look, if we've survived, we deserve a big pay rise. And I think there's a really good, I've never encouraged people to do this, but if you take a look at Brentford's or any other club that's sort of been through that position, when Brentford got promoted to the Premier League, in the first season, their wage bill was far, far lower than any other club. They were paying 30 grand a week. Season number 2, players and the agents come knocking on the door. Look, we've proven ourselves in the Premier League. We want a big pay rise. That 30 grand went to 45 grand. And I think when the third season's results come out, that 45 grand will go to 55. So if you survive in the Premier League, that's fantastic from the club's point of view, from the fans' point of view, from the players' point of view. But it does come as a financial cost. And any profits you make in that first season in the Premier League evaporate and quickly become losses, unless you're successful in the transfer market.
Actually, one thing that has come to mind, and very, very last question, is of course Bill Foley has mentioned Europe as well and how he wants to get to that level. Now, the thing is with PSR and, of course, the new rules that will come in, it seems like it's making it more difficult for teams like Bournemouth and even Brighton and Brentford and Wolves to actually break into that because of those top 6, now 7 teams. I would add Newcastle in there as well. The amount of money they are making from gate revenues, we're trying to increase it with special edition shirts and things like that. How close to the mark do you think that Bournemouth will have to sail to these rules to actually even remotely have that chance of getting to that?
I think what you have to do is to acknowledge that you can't be bigger, so therefore you have to be smarter.
Yeah.
If you take a look at the degree of wealth, and I agree with you, we've got the top 6 who are making. Manchester City are generating £700 million a season. Liverpool are more than 600. Manchester United more than 600. Newcastle have joined the gang because of the wealth of their owners. Villa are in the Champions League slots this year, deservedly so. Yeah. But they've also got their owners. One of their owners is the richest man in Egypt. They've got another billionaire owner as well. So you've got to provide an element of funding. But if you're up against billionaires, just being a billionaire yourself isn't enough, as Bill Foley, no doubt, is finding out. So therefore, you can either be bigger or be niche. And I think what Bournemouth would have to do is to try to replicate the Brentford or the Brighton model, which is look for players in different markets. Mm-hmm. Because a good striker who's expected to go for 40 to 50 million pounds is going to be looking for wages to represent that, to reflect that. And I don't think that's in your budget. And also the chances are that you are then competing against, even if you're not competing against the big 6, you're competing against West Ham or Villa and so on, and they can afford to pay more. So I think you've got to sort of go down the route that we've seen some of these other clubs. Look at sort of mid-table players in France, in Belgium, perhaps look at South America, look at the Asian market and so on, and try to recruit there. And what you'll have to do is to accept that you'll get a lot of misses, just as ideally you get a few hits as well. Yeah, and a lot is spoken. I'm a Brighton fan, so I'm that much close. A lot is spoken about Brighton's successful model. We've signed a load of turkeys as well. But the trouble is, we signed so many players that if we sign 10 players and 3 of them come onto a success, all of the interest is in, Caicedo's gone for 150 million, Cucurella's gone for 60 million, Trossard's gone for 30 million, Bissouma's gone. But I can assure you, there's plenty of other players. When we're fishing in that sort of 3 to 10 million pound market, who come, never make the first team, go out on loan, and they don't get a mention because nobody knows who they are.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll both have a very, very good season next year, Kieran, and keep up the great work as well on the Price of Football podcast as well. If anybody hasn't listened to it, link is down below. Go and make sure you listen to Kieran every Friday, isn't it?
It's every Tuesday, Thursday, and sometimes Friday. So once I finish with you, I'm interviewing Maheta Malongo, who's the chief of the PFA, about player issues, potentially a player strike, and so on. So we have a news show, we have a readers' question show, which I never thought would be a success, but we've got hundreds of unanswered questions, so they keep me occupied, and we're trying to interview people from within the industry itself as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kieran. And like I say, link is down below for the Price of Football podcast. Go and make sure that you follow Kieran on Spotify as well. So thank you, Kieran, again for your time, and no doubt we'll catch up with you very soon.
Well, thank you, and have a great season. Enjoy every moment of it. That's always my view, and it's not the football we go for, it's the friendship and the company.
Exactly. And all the very, very best to Brighton as well. Thanks.
Cheers, Craig. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
And thank you everybody for joining us. Please remember, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell button below. It does help this channel to grow. See, that rhymes. Also do check out all of our other interviews, but there is also a very special show that is coming up on Friday at 5 o'clock. So make sure you hit the like, subscribe and the bell, because you'll be the first to be alerted of that. We've got our season preview show. You might be able to guess who is coming on. Do also check out all of our other interviews as well. We've had Richard Archer, of course, from Hardfi, Adam Devlin from the Blue Tones, Richie Neville from Five, Tom Meehan from Kasabian, Tiff Nadell, of course, formerly of Top Gear, Damon Minchella from Ocean Colour Scene, and lots of other special guests. So go check those out as well. Lots of player interviews, and of course our cherry picking podcast. And also coming very soon, this is Football with the Man in the Know, Manny. So until next one, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Up the Cherries.
The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.